Welcome to today's webinar, Turn Your Employees' Expertise into Thought Leadership, sponsored and hosted by WebAttract, the leaders in thought leadership webinars. And you are in the right place to learn how you can nurture employees' thought leaders inside your company. Hi, I'm Mike Agron, co-founder and executive webinar producer with WebAttract, and I'll be your moderator and one of your hosts for today's session. In just a moment, I'm going to be introducing our featured speaker and thought leader architect, Mitchell Levy, who's going to be sharing what he hopes you'll get out of today. But first, let's talk a little bit about who's in the audience. We have a diverse audience of over 300 professionals representing the following industry distributions. A lot of folks from B2B, B2C, and others. But today, what we want to be able to focus on is thought leadership. And it's really become synonymous with driving customer awareness, brand loyalty, and long-term profitability. We believe that thought leaders inside your organization can really become your secret weapon to attract prospects or advocates and also retain your best clients. But regardless of your industry type, we're confident you're going to find today's webinar value. Well, here's the person that I've had the pleasure of working with for almost a year. And Mitchell Levy, according to LinkedIn, is really the first thought leader architect in the world. And he's got some terrific information to share. And in fact, today's webinar in part is based on one of his most current books called Creating Thought Leaders Tweet. And I'm going to give all of you a chance to opt in for a complimentary copy of this ebook, and I'm going to do that at the end of the webinar, so hang around for that. But let me tell you a little bit about Mitchell. As you can see, he's got quite a background, starting in the corporate world with Sun. He's also successfully founded over 15 firms and partnerships. He's written 19 books, and he was recently the chairman of the board of a NASDAQ-listed company. Today, he's the CEO of THiNKaha, and I call him a friend, I call him a mentor, and I call him just a great guy to know. So, Mitchell, I want to welcome you to the webinar, and why don't you step up to the virtual podium and tell the folks what we're going to cover and what you hope they get out of today.
Mike, great to be here. Thanks for having me, and great intro. Thank you. You know, I am certainly not the type of person who likes to read slides, so this will be the only time in the presentation. Hopefully you'll see that. But we thought it was important enough that you would know we are going to cover what is thought leadership, why is it vital to your survival, the 4 components of employee thought leadership, how to capitalize on the thought leadership funnel. So I'm going to share a thought leadership funnel that's not in the marketplace today. What they're going to do, I like to end presentations always with, is what do you need to do now? What do you need to do the rest of the day? So how do you make it happen for yourself? How do you get your employees going immediately? And then we'll share some lessons learned, and hopefully we'll end up with a bunch of questions at the end and have time for that. So Mike, what I'm kind of curious about is, based on those that are in the audience, what percentage of folks do they think their employees, what percentage of their employees should be thought leaders? Can you run with a poll?
You got it. Folks, if you take a look at your screen, a poll has just come up. What we'd like you to do is tell us, based upon where you are today, what percentage of your organization do you consider thought leaders? Is it 0%? Is it 1%? Is it 2 to 5%, 6 to 25%, or 26% plus? And let's go ahead and share the results, Mitchell. What's your thoughts about this?
Very nice. It's interesting. It's certainly along lines with what my expectations were. For those, by the way, that are at 0, we need to fix that immediately. We'll go through the presentation, but I'm pleasantly surprised at the 18% that has it at 26 plus. My expectations is we were going to see the bulk at 2 to 5%. So, Mike, this is very enlightening.
Well, good. Let's jump into the first of the topics we have, which is, what is thought leadership? Please define it, and why is it vital to your survival?
So the first thing that I want to talk about is if, in order to define thought leadership, let's look at the definition. We all know what an expert is. It's somebody who has expertise in a space. The thought leader is the go-to person in the space. It is the person that you think about as the expert. A good way to think about it is, let's say you're a firm, you're selling accounting systems to doctors' offices, right? You're going to have at least one thought leader. It's the one who does the entire country. But what you should really have is you should have a thought leader, not just for accounting systems and doctor's offices, but you should have it very territorial. So not only do you have your vertical, but the territorial piece is the salespeople. The salespeople who are touching key clients and key geographies, and by the way, this is called social selling. We'll talk a little bit more about that. They should be thought leaders in their space, and so they are recognized by the people who are doing it. And we could talk about how to curate and aggregate content, and we'll do that as part of it. But if you take a look at, this is kind of what I expected today, and it's along the lines of the poll where you got 1 of 12 who is a thought leader. Here's sort of my shocker today. I think that at least 60% of your organization should be thought leaders. You can make an argument that 100% need to be evangelists, but at least 60% should be thought leaders. So that 26 plus that we had, that number should be a lot higher. So here's sort of my definition of thought leadership, right? And I think of it as audience by content. When you have a very little audience and very little content, you are by definition unknown. And for many people, that's potentially a bad thing. If you have a large audience but very narrow content, I think of Guy Kawasaki, the first evangelist we ever knew. Now, Guy has definitely transformed himself, and he's much more than an evangelist today. But when he was an evangelist for Apple, I'm thinking he fit squarely into that area. So very focused, very narrow. An expert is somebody with a fairly small audience, but is very well known, has a good amount of content, right? And of course, what we're looking for is to put people in the thought leadership space where they have a large enough audience. Now, the audience, remember, the audience has to be appropriate for the audience you're going after. So territorially, it could be a small audience, and you could be a thought leader because you've defined your audience and your vertical appropriately. So anyhow, I thought I'd share a 2x2, and this we actually have on the THiNKaha website, as well as the slides will be going out. So why is thought leadership vital to your survival? Well, you know, if you look at the polls, it ranges between 60 to 80%. What we say here is 75% of B2B customers do online research first before they actually talk to the company. I saw a poll from the National Association of Realtors that it's 90%. So imagine that you are what was in the past a preview to the salesperson having access to the sales cycle. It is now invisible. So the sales cycle, which was previously available to the corporations and to the salespeople, is now invisible, and that's something we need to work around. That's what thought leadership is all about. So here's another area. Once again, it's another marketing slide I'm excited about. You need to have a four-legged stool. To me, thought leadership is about three things. It's about social media, it's about traditional media, and it's about employee engagement, employee activism. I mean, in the old days when your employees would go home and they'd sit around the dinner table and they'd moan about the company, they'd do it to their family. Now they moan online and they're talking to tens, hundreds, or thousands of individuals. It's important to make sure that every employee is an evangelist. And as I mentioned, 60% of thought leaders. If you take a look at the rest of the stool, we've got social media, we've got more traditional media. I think what's fun and interesting about social media is the opportunity to, and I've added the adjectives educational and fun, the opportunity to actually reach out and touch people and do experiments in such a way where you could see if it works or not. You get lucky sometimes where things go viral. You get other times you're just purely educational. And what you're really looking at here is the opportunity to turn, in the old world it used to be called prospects, the opportunity to turn in the new world called future advocates, how to turn your advocates into advocates. So we play with THiNKaha. We've got a nice app. We play with the educational and fun area of social media, and I've seen lots of great experiments out there.
So, Mitchell, let's jump from the four-legged stool of thought leadership to the four components of what employee thought leadership is. And hello to Steve and Tony and Patty and Jill for joining too. Back to you.
Great, thanks. So when I talk to companies and when I'm thinking about who they are and what they do, whether it's individuals or companies or employees within companies, I actually think this way. And what I'm thinking about is I'm thinking, do they have help? Do they need help? Think of it from the perspective of them themselves. And I'm a big acronym fan, so I'm always going to grab an acronym. But it's, I shake your hand and as you're telling me your 30-second pitch, I'm thinking about these 4 elements, right? So let's start with H. H is for healthy following. And I brought up Ashton Kutcher for a number of different reasons, and that is, obviously, we all know him as an actor. As an actor, he's been successful at driving a large following. I mean, what companies, what individuals wouldn't mind 15 million followers on Twitter, 16 million likes on Facebook? I mean, it's spectacular. What a lot of you know, and some may not, is he's also an investor in startup companies, and he uses these platforms to actually start polling the audience and sharing some of the things that he's doing with a much larger platform. So he's built a platform in some area and used it. So when we talk about the P of help, he's actually using his own platforms to drive more success for him. And I think a lot of the companies that we'll reference do that as well. The second thing I want to talk about is the E for exceptional execution. What's super urgent, what's super important in today's world is the opportunity that when you touch somebody, you got to touch them in a way that they're happy about it. They want to come back. You want to turn every opportunity that you have to touch your, once again, it used to be all prospects, to touch your future advocates and turn them into advocates is really important. And Marcus Sheridan does that real well. And Mike, you met Marcus at a CMI event. You want to talk about him for a second?
Sure. CMI being the Content Marketing Institute, which Joe Polizzi runs. I think it's interesting because what Joe Polizzi says is that the next thing in becoming content aware is thought leadership. And Marcus is an interesting study because his company, a small company, was really hit by the downturn several years ago, and he realized that he needed to get more business and rise above the noise. And what he ended up doing is blogging on everything people would want to possibly know about pools. Next thing you know, Google picks him up and turned his company around, and he's just done an incredible job of using his thought leadership to be very, very successful and build an organization and a following. I mean, I just think it's fantastic, Mitchell.
Yeah, and I think it's great for and an opportunity when you think about someone like Marcus, and there are many people you think about, and you get to touch people in social media today in such a way that they give you things and you feel good about who they are. And one of those people, shout out to Jill Raleigh here. Jill was known as the Eloquent Queen over at Eloquent, and she is pushing social media and social selling. And I think the exciting part, as Oracle has purchased Eloquent, is that her responsibility now is to educate the new salespeople coming on board, to educate the sales force on being able to do social selling, to really make thought leaders within their organization that are selling in the way that needs to happen. And I'm excited to be working with her and seeing the things that she's doing. And if you just Google Jill Raleigh, you will get a lot of information on her. And Jill is another one of those people. When you reach out to her socially, she'll talk back. And I think that's part of the E. That's part of the execute well, but you listen and watch her videos, and she's definitely putting leadership out there. P is different than what I think you might be thinking. When I think about proven platform, what I'm thinking about is the thought leadership platform. I mean, we know these names. Marketo, HubSpot, over the last 2 years, they've done a redefinition of an ebook. It's now a 30-page PowerPoint slide. But what they also have is they have platforms. And if you look at the authors of those ebooks, they're internal employees. And if you look at the levels of the employee in the organization, sometimes they're certainly not the top levels. They're the bottom levels. What's happening is these companies are recognizing the importance of social selling and having many people in the organization actually participate. The Content Marketing Institute, Joe Polizzi, has done a phenomenal job of content marketing, getting the brand out. And Mike, you actually were able to use his platform when he does his conference. He has a bunch of thought leaders come and present. And Mike, you had a chance to experience that.
I did, and I also have worked with InsideSales.com, and I think that to your point, one needs a proven platform to rise above and be heard, and Content Marketing Institute provides that. If you really have something to offer and contribute and help educate people, which is what about content marketing is about, it's just a wonderful way to work. And I put up there, we have up there some other logos. There's a company there called Sales Fusion, which is in the marketing automation space. And many of you on this webinar may not have heard them, but the point is that even companies that are not as well known in their space as others, they're still doing some incredible things with employees to blog and do webinars to educate the market and make them more aware, which is really what thought leadership is all about, Mitchell.
And if you look at, Mike, if you look at inside sales, Ken Krogh is an absolute expert at this. I mean, not only does he partner with Marketo and HubSpot and CMI on the things that they do, but he also grabs other people who may not have the same platform, but they have good content. And those people are using inside sales to move along. He's experimented with a number of things, Google Hangouts and others, and I know Jill Raleigh's been participating. I've been invited to participate. Anyhow, it's a great opportunity. What you should be thinking about is, when you think about thought leadership, think about help. It's your healthy following, it's exceptional execution, demonstrating some leadership, and some of that doesn't have to be original, some of it's curated and aggregated. And then, of course, having a platform, either yours that you're using or borrowing other people's platform to get your message out.
And Mitchell, before you go into this, I just trying to emulate it, is to absolutely find every opportunity that you can add value and do it. It doesn't matter if you're getting paid for it or not. It's just great to be out there, and as Marcus Sheridan did, it's just a great way to get known.
Mike, this is what you and I are doing right now, right? We are using each other's platforms to help communicate a message in an effective way, to educate the marketplace and drive future advocates into advocates. I think it's fantastic.
There you go.
So the next thing is the thought leadership funnel, and you may not have seen anything like this before. And when I first started doing this, 2013 has been a big transition year for me. And when I first started doing this, I started thinking to myself, okay, what is the appropriate way to generate ROI? How do you make this happen? And if you look at the funnel, and we created this thought leadership funnel, you want people to be aware of who you are. You want them to engage with who you are. Jill was nice enough to let me borrow the term future advocate, so I had prospect in there at some point in time. And of course, at the bottom, you have an advocate. What's interesting about an advocate is they may not actually have been a customer, right? And so I started presenting this and started sharing this with others. I was in front of a Vistage group of CEOs, and the CEO said to me, Mitchell, what is wrong with this picture? And I go, I don't know, you tell me. He goes, well, you're assuming that things move from the top to the bottom, and at the bottom it's narrower than it is at the top. And what I wanted to mention, and all of a sudden I had this aha moment, love aha moments. I had this vision. Do you remember when websites first came out? We always assumed that the homepage was where people were going on the website. But you know what? That's not true anymore. And what happens, obviously, with Google, you go into the special location that the person who has interest is very interested in going to, right? So this is not the funnel. The words are similar, but let me share with you the thought leadership funnel. So what we're looking at here is the recognition that at the bottom, you may actually have more people who are advocates than you've even touched. So at the beginning, at the top, you want to generate awareness. That's one to many. And you do it through these vehicles that I mentioned there. What you're then doing is you want to create engagement. This webinar, for instance, is an engagement, a physical talk, looking at content. There are many ways to engage people. What's interesting about this one is there are sometimes, like this webinar, you may not have known about Mike Agron or Mitchell Levy. You just sign up for the webinar, and hopefully we've helped you become engaged and turn you into a future advocate. And you take a look at the future advocate, typically what happens there's a one-to-one relationship. They're looking for your content, whether it's a phone call, email, direct correspondence. You got to touch them in such a way where you are executing well, and then all of a sudden you turn it into an advocate. And what's interesting about the advocate is once you have an advocate, and advocates, they may have purchased products from you, they may look at you positively, they're certainly going to be giving you reviews, endorsements, referrals. But what's interesting is advocates are going to be talking about you without you asking them to talk. If you're providing good content and you're providing good experience, you're executing well, and you're putting out your leadership, remember, you're doing what's help, you're delivering help, you're getting these advocates who are really driving things for you. You know, it's funny. I asked my son, because we always want to name something, and I asked my son, what do I call this? You know, so we call it thought leadership funnel. It's kind of not really a funnel exactly, but maybe that's what we'll do with it. And he goes, Dad, that's a double trapezoid. And I said, well, I'm not sure that's going to work. So hey, listen, I'm open. If you got a good name for this thing, let me know. But I'll give you one example of cases where you can be an advocate, even a paid advocate, before you do anything else. So my son, 15-year-olds, does a lot of gaming, right? And so one of the things that happens is his friends will influence him, right? They'll influence him. There'll be future advocates and advocates for a particular product, and that particular product, one of the products he had was a product called Fallout. And a lot of his friends said, hey, you've got to get this product. You've got to use it. So he just went out and bought it, right? Then he liked the product enough, so they executed well enough that he then found out who the company was. So he was not aware of who the company was, just the product. He then looked at the company, and he's purchased every product that the company's made, right? So it's kind of interesting because the funnel here is so much different than we thought. It's not top-down anymore. You're coming in at any particular location. And so, we have some ROI components associated with this, and I'm happy to talk more about it. But this is what I want you to be thinking about in terms of the thought leadership funnel.
Well, Mitchell, I think we're on one of the final sections here on talking about how we actually help organizations jumpstart and activating their employees' influence. What are some of the things that we can do? And I know you've got this outlined, and we've got quite a few questions coming in, so I'm going to let you take this portion over.
I always like to stand in front of an audience and have people know what they could do tomorrow. I mean, and given that the time of day, know what they can actually do today. So these are 3 steps, and they come directly from the Creating Thought Leaders tweet book. I think, as you mentioned, I've written 19 books. This is my 18th. And you know what? Even if I could say so myself, I actually am reading it and practicing myself. So it's always nice when you have an asset that you can actually use yourself. And one of the things that's important, so here are 3 steps. 1, define your market. So who is the market, who you're going after, what services can you deliver? And then what's really important is define it both vertically, in the vertical you're going to play, and also the segment you're going to play. So if you want to think about how you allocated your salespeople from a territories perspective, that might be a good way to do it. You want to make sure that it's manageable, that you can put your arms around, that once again, you look at the picture, you're focusing on a very specific market where you can actually say, this is where I want to be, not just the expert, but I want to be the go-to person. I want to be the known expert, the thought leader. Step 2, and I'm doing this every day, and I'll tell you, I'm doing it through a LinkedIn. I've created a LinkedIn group called Thought Leadership Best Practices, and every day as a thought leader, I'm reading 1 to 10 articles. I'm taking one of those articles and I'm curating it. And what I do is not only do I put the article on the page itself, but I then actually post on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, a link to the article that's curated and the author that's created it. And I've picked up probably 50 to 60% of the authors have joined the group. So it's a great opportunity for me to befriend other thought leaders, right? Because what I'm doing is I'm reading their work and I'm commenting on it, and I like it. So I'm sharing their thought leadership, I'm commenting on their blogs, I'm retweeting their tweets. Essentially, what we're doing is we're building the clout score. So that's one of the tools that you can use to measure influence. There's a number of tools that corporations can use, and I think that's kind of what's really important is to make friends who can help you share your thought leadership, your L, with their platform. Okay, step 3, make it happen. right? So start setting up media engagement, start making things happen. We just created a Google, my friend Michael Pacopi and I just created a Google Hangout on thought leadership. So we will be interviewing people regularly, but there are many of those Hangouts that are available or other areas in which you could share your leadership. It's important to write. I am a big fan of writing and crowdsourcing books. The THiNKaha series is comprised of 140 Twitter-sized quotes. Very easy to write a book and then share it in multiple formats, multiple platforms. I also want to point out that content can not just be originated but aggregated and curated. And so the ability for you to do that, and actually the post in the Thought Leadership blog this morning was on how to go about curating content and the difference between aggregation and curating content. And the thing that I want to really mention is step 3. I think what's important for everyone that's listening is you got to make it a habit, right? I was a local newspaper, the San Jose Mercury News. I was a local newspaper subscriber for 23 years. 9 months ago, I canceled my subscription. I now read it online on my iPad mini. And at the same time I read the paper, I also read the New York Times. Now, what I really love about the New York Times and how they did their paper is that any particular article I'm reading, I could then instantly, within 2 clicks, I could share it via email or whatever platform I want to whoever I'm thinking about. So we've published over 240 books. I got a bunch of authors. I can easily share articles that are associated and relevant to them with them. So that's now a habit. I feel bad if I don't read the paper in the morning. I added to that habit a couple months ago, the habit of going online and checking my social media components. So I do that as well. So I'll spend 15 minutes online checking Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+, and Twitter, and sort of commenting, sharing, liking what people are doing. And I spend 2 minutes on my app doing the same sort of thing, is sharing content in the world, the THiNKaha app. And so what's important is to allocate time every day to make it a habit. So part of what we want to do here, the premise of the webinar, is to get you guys thinking about the importance of your employees' expertise being thought leaders. You know, we shared a 2x2 model, which was audience by content. I shared the 4 components of help. Shared with you a thought leadership funnel, which is a great way to start looking at it, changing behavior, and creating an ROI. Gave you the 3 simple tips. And what I wanted to do as well is end with the 6 lessons that I learned in 2013. And what's interesting, I think some of these are apple pie and motherhood, and some of them will go, oh, that's pretty fascinating. So this is the 2013 lessons. You know, I think what we showed and what was obvious now is that the sales process is now invisible to the salesperson and the organization. So what's important is to create thought leaders and to, whether you call it social selling, micro-marketing. Julio Viscovich is a big fan of, Hootsuite's big fan of micro-marketers. So whether you do it in that particular way, it's important to figure out how to go out there and touch your future advocates to turn them into advocates. Whether or not the number 2 is an absolute truth today, or there are many people at organizations trying to make it happen, social selling is or will be the new norm. I think number 3 is interesting, and based on some of the questions we have, we need to help employees become thought leaders to win. And once again, what it means, everyone in the organization should be an evangelist of the company. 60% should be thought leaders. Obviously, it's going to change by industry and vertical, but I think the interesting part here is the name of the game needs to change, and how we focus our employees to help us. Our best advocate, by the way, if you're inside a company, the best platform you have, you're inside a company of 100,000 employees, your platform is an email to every employee. By definition, you're trusted and you could share good content and start motivating people to move in a certain way. It's pretty exciting. Number 4 is to make sure that you narrow the space of the thought leader, the right vertical, the right geographical area. Make it in such a way where you can put your arms around it and make it happen. And this way, you can expand the number of thought leaders inside your company. Every employee needs to be an evangelist. I mentioned that. And number 6 is this is sort of mom reminding you about the golden rule. You know, you got to be nice to everyone because you don't know who your next advocate will be. You know, everyone is a future advocate in one way or the other, and so you don't know who your next advocate is. And so I think it's important to be nice to everyone, and I think that's the premise of social selling and micro-marketing. So Mike, I'm kind of curious. You know, we did this in a pretty rapid time. There's lots of content, good tools to share. I'm curious if we changed the needle. So I'm wondering if we could take another poll and see what people were thinking of in terms of what percentage of the employee base should be thought leaders.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see how we move the needle. So, folks, this is our second poll. And if you would now tell us, based upon what you learned today, or what percent of your employees will be thought leaders tomorrow, let's go ahead and see. Let's see if we've been able to articulate our passion for thought leadership and see how everybody in the audience has picked up. So, you know, Mitchell, one of the things that I wanted to tell you that I think is the most enlightening of all the work we've done together is the word advocate. I've really never liked the word prospect. It kind of sounds less than or target. I love the word advocate, and you have really helped change that in my thinking. So I thank you for that. Get ready, Mitchell, and let's see what your thoughts are on how we did today.
Better. Holy cow. I love it. By the way, thank you for that 4% who said zero. Who's the 4% in the old poll that had zero thought leaders. Having that zero now, hey, we're there. I'm excited. The 1% typically is the smaller company who thinks that the one CEO or the one executive should be the thought leader. And I just would encourage you to actually focus on thinking about making everyone else contribute, making everyone help. And actually, it's not really making anymore. It's encouraging. It's making it happen. But Mike, look at the numbers. The bell curve is definitely skewed towards the 25% and beyond.
Terrific.
Now, by the way, if we did this next year, that 26% should be the bulk. So that's the goal for the next one. But I'm very excited about being able to communicate this. And I do communicate very often the importance of making this happen. I'm glad you're able to participate. We had, just so you know, a lot of people gave some great questions and great statements of what they want to learn. I was so excited to read through that. And so we got a bunch of those questions that we can answer, as well as questions that are coming in from the folks. So,
and they're coming up in just a moment. Let me just kind of wind out the formal part before we both step up to the virtual podium and tell people how they can continue the conversation and get more information. In just a moment, I'm going to give you all an opportunity to opt in to get a free link to download the ebook of Creating Thought Leaders Tweet. Also, you see how you can get a hold of Mitchell, his website. And Mitchell also has, as I do on LinkedIn, a thought leadership group, which is available by going on LinkedIn. Something that we didn't really get a chance to talk about, which is pretty exciting, particularly because it's free, is the THiNKaha app. So, Mitch, why don't you take a second and talk about that, and then we'll move on.
Sure. And one of the things that I'll try to make a promise on, I sort of remembered or mentioned that Jill Raleigh's good at responding. One of a lot of my favorite thought leaders out there are just really good at responding to people's social media. So if you reach out to me, I'll do my best to respond in a quick and efficient manner. The Thought Leadership Group on LinkedIn is a great place for you to start learning and also contributing, because we have some great people already there, and we'll grow that tremendously. The THiNKaha app is free, so it's on the iTunes store. You download that. It's comprised of 140 Twitter-sized quotes, so it's a great opportunity on any particular topic to amplify and activate your messages. And like I said, I wake up in the morning, I spend 2 minutes, and I've sent two quotes to LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Google+. And then I come back, and during the day, what's very cool is seeing what people are doing in terms of sharing, liking, and basically I'm using other advocates who are helping to share my messages, or maybe they're future advocates, soon to be turned into advocates. And so the THiNKaha app's a great tool to use, and in my company, we can actually go ahead and ghostwrite books for the series as well, and we're happy to help. So happy to talk about that, and please feel free to use that, and join us on in the conversation for the Thought Leadership Best Practices group on LinkedIn.
Thanks, Mitchell. Well, don't go anywhere, because we've got a lot of questions that I want to go and have you start to answer, and then I'm going to put up in just a second a way for people to get a free copy of the book. So the first question I have here is from Cheryl. Cheryl wants to know, it says, social executives drive the mission, vision, and value into their culture. Why do you think this is important? And that's for you, Mitchell.
Yeah, Cheryl, thanks for sharing. You know, in the big picture, if you take a look at the transition the country, the world has made, we were in an industrial society. Some people would say we're in an internet society. I think we're there, sort of, but I don't think we're even close to being into the internet age that we should be. We are still making that transition on how to do things. The way companies are organized, structured, the way processes are done, the annual review is still so archaic, and it's a direct result of organizational, industrial society. In an internet-based society, you know immediately that the most important thing is what question can you ask to generate the right answer. And so in a lot of cases, to get employees excited and motivated and to allow them to be thought leaders is they need to be compensated. First, they need to be given permission, right? They need to be told that this is important and this is helpful. They need to be compensated. So what do you need to do? You need to measure it, right? And then you need to show the results, right? So what does that sound like? If you think about all the things I said, it sounds a lot like gamification, right? So if you could gamify the experience where you get your employees motivated, excited to go out and be social selling advocates, and some of the big companies you could take a look at, or the companies that are doing this today, Bunchball is one, Badgeville is another. If you want to create a gamification company, you obviously have to start it with the letter B. Sorry, that was a joke. But I think, Cheryl, the interesting part is employees don't necessarily feel they have permission to go out and do that, and companies still, are concerned about some of the messages that employees say, and I just think if you go back to the point where organization is invisible in 70 to 90% of the sales cycle, well, the employees need to be out there talking, but it can't be puppets. You can't just be solving the problem. That they have a true voice and an honest voice. And that actually comes, that vision, that is given by the executive staff in a number of cases. Sort of a engaged activity, whether you do tops down or bottoms up. Tops down is certainly always much more effective.
Thanks, Mitchell. We've got Jolene coming up, Naima, Todd, so let's go in that order. Jolene wants to know, you mentioned how ebooks, and I hope I'm reading this right, are now 30% PowerPoint. Is this effective, and are the more interactive ebooks better?
Jolie, that's a great question. As a firm that's published 240 titles, and each one of our titles are also ebooks as well. I like to say that an ebook is much more than a 30-page PowerPoint slide. But what they're really doing is they're utilizing their platform to reach their future advocates and to turn their future advocates into advocates. So they're creating a touch point, right? And that touch point is something that if you could read a 30-page PowerPoint in 5 or 10 minutes, or if you could read a THiNKaha book in 15 minutes, and that is enough. Or even if you read 2 or 3 tweets and you go to a blog post and you get excited about it, and that's enough to get you excited, enough for you to share, to do something where you're actually demonstrating that you're interested in the topic, that's pretty interesting, right? And so, the concept of still calling it a book or an ebook gives it the credibility. They're using their platform, what they're really doing is they're touching you, and that touch of you is what's important to move your way through the thought leadership funnel. Are they effective? Absolutely, but that's a great question, right? The question that you really should be asking is, do I have the tool sets in place to measure the effectiveness? Because every time you execute a particular thought leadership strategy or approach, you should be measuring your results. And based on your results, if they work, you spend more time and energy. If they don't work, you do something else.
Thanks, Mitchell. This is from Naima. Can you share some info about ROI of thought leadership? How do you measure it? And what is a good timeline for measuring the ROI? Thanks, Naima.
We'll start with a timeline. It's not one of those things you do overnight. In the old days, we'll use the world of book publishers. In the old days, you come out with a book, the book publisher spends a ton of money. You spend typically $250,000, $500,000 publicizing a book campaign, and it becomes a New York Times bestseller, and then that person becomes a expert thought leader, and life goes wonderfully from there. That doesn't really work. There's so many platforms that people have today. There's so many microphones that people have to be able to share. That doesn't really work today as it did in the past. There's some great case studies on gamification of organizations where they've made every employee a thought leader or push to make that happen. You can use tools like Clout. There are a number of other tools as well where you basically are measuring social media influence. But what you're ultimately, and one of the things that's just, it's happening a lot, but it's not as measured as well as it could be, is using traditional media to drive people to social media and measuring the effect of whether or not they came through the traditional media or social media and what the end result is. So you could look at firms like Inside Sales, where they're not only gamifying the opportunity of selling, but they're also keeping track of what percentage of sales at the end of the day came from different social media channels, right? So you could start keeping track of who is touching you, how they're touching you, how they reached you, and of course at the end of the day it's all about ongoing revenue. But when we're talking about that revenue, and this is part of the transition today into a SaaS-based environment, when you're talking about revenue from a SaaS-based environment, what you're really looking at is you're looking at not only grabbing and continually adding more customers, but you're also managing your churn. And your churn is something where, you want to make sure that not as many people are leaving and that they're staying around, because what's super about SaaS is an ongoing, periodic revenue stream. Once again, it's another way in which your salespeople are less about the initial sale and more about making the client, making the advocate a ongoing advocate, so that making them excited and moving forward over time. So hopefully we covered a little bit. There will be some models that will come directly out of the thought leadership funnel that we shared. And I certainly am looking for some partners where we can drive that to a next level, both with tools and the right technology to make it happen.
All right, Mitchell, we've got Todd up, Anna's next, the Neil, Kimberly. We've got quite a few questions. So let's go to the one from Todd. Speaking of weight, he says, I see you're referencing a Clout score. So how much weight does this really carry? There seems to be a lot of debate about this. That's for you, Mitchell.
Yeah, Todd, I don't think the jury is 100% out on that yet. Whether or not using Clout or Cred or a number of other tools to sort of measure the success rate of your social media activities. What it does do in the space is let you know how active you are. So how many followers, how many likes, how many shares. It sort of lets you know the pervasiveness of your reach in the marketplace. But what I'd like to say is, if you define a thought leader to be very specific, both territorially and vertically, that thought leader may end up with a relatively low Clout score, because Clout is measuring things on a much more aggregate level, where your measurement might be, let's say once again, let's grab a salespeople who's selling into Boston, Massachusetts, and there are 10 prospects, right? If there are 10 prospects, there's a 10 named accounts. If all 10 accounts know that person well, know that they can help, they're the go-to person to solve problems, you know, do you care what the cloud score is if they're continually communicating in a way that's generating both good content for them, you know, they're aggregating, they're curating, they're originating content, they're known as the go-to person. You know, that's a scenario where the cloud score may not be as relevant. We need the next evolution of measurement tools that say the thought leader wants to be a thought leader in this space, and this is their cloud score, or whatever the right score is, in relation to the space they've chosen to be a thought leader in.
Thanks, Mitchell.
Mike, that makes sense?
Yes. Anna wants to know, and we've got some other great ones here. These have all been great questions. Anna wants to know, can you elaborate on the narrow space in the funnel and, you know, really what makes for success or failure here?
So so Anna, let me define your question so I think I understand it, so I could answer the right one. When you say the narrow space in the funnel, if you're talking about the narrow space that you define for the thought leader, right? So I think in the past, when we hear the word thought leader and we think about a company, right? We think, oh, hey, there's one big thought leader for the company, that's the CEO. If you take it to a new level and say, if you just agree with my speculation that 60% of the company need to be thought leaders, then what needs to happen is you need to narrow the space enough for that thought leader so that it is very clear who their targets are. Right? When I work with companies that are selling software enhancement products to the telecommunication industry, right? What's real nice about that, to some extent, is they know who all their customers are, right? It's a very narrow scope. They know who they are, they know who to touch, and they know how to go about doing it. So what I'm suggesting happens for the thought leaders in your organization is that you define a marketplace and you define a space that is easy for them to put their arms around. And then what you do is you find the other thought leaders that are also participating in the space, the other platforms, whether they're traditional media or online media, and you go after reaching and touching and basically making sure all of your future advocates are getting to hear from you and doing your best to turn them into advocates.
Thanks, Mitchell. Here's a question from Neil. While we want to enable our employees to become thought leaders, how do you suggest we ensure the content is edited and of quality?
Oh, you know, that is such a great question, Neil. And the answer, there's two answers, right? One answer, let's give the answer that will shock everyone, is do we care? Okay, and there's an extent, there's a piece of that that says, well, maybe we don't, right? Social media happens quickly, it happens efficiently. It's one of those things. We don't care if it doesn't have a negative effect to the thing, if it's genuine and real. Now, what does that really mean? I don't think the answer is we don't really care. There's a couple of things that companies need to do. Absolutely, you need to have a social media policy in place. But it can't be one that has handcuffs associated with it. You have to allow people to really share their voice, to be able to say what they want to say. And I think it's marketing's job to help provide content that is worthy of sharing, that is interesting for the employees to share appropriately. So the employee who's the thought leader doesn't have to originate everything themselves. There are a lot of times where people say that the origination component of content should be about 20%, and 80% should be aggregated and curated. Well, wouldn't that be a great opportunity for marketing to share content in bite-sized morsels, which is what people want to see and read today, to take bite-sized morsels and share them in such a way where the employee base can then share it in their networks across their platforms. And so I think there's a combination of sometimes it's not as important to be perfect, but what is important is to communicate a message that people want to hear, but is genuine from the thought leaders who are sharing it, right? It can't be contrived.
Mitchell, this question from Lori pretty much dovetails on what you just said, but let me ask it. Our leadership is worried about employees working on blogs and other thought leadership type things during their work hours, and it will take away from, and they're worried that it will take away from their other projects. Any suggestions, ideas?
Yeah. This is the chicken and egg thing. If the premise of this webinar is true, by definition, people working on their blogs and in social media tools is not taking away but adding to the overall value that the company has in the marketplace, the overall notion that the company has in the marketplace. I know you got to be careful, right? You don't want people looking at websites and doing things which are against company policy. That's always a bad thing. But what needs to happen is you just need to share with management a couple of interesting case studies, a couple of places where the sale of the company, whether it's an advocate who's pushing you in a certain area or a customer turned advocate, where that was influenced, was helped along by social media, because that's where you start, when executives start seeing the ROI, the direct results that come from being visible. Once again, if you share with them the invisibility of the sales cycle today and now show them with social media how they have become visible, when you share that, that's when people start thinking and looking at this world in a slightly different way. And there's a lot of great books out there. Cheryl Burgess, has a great book on the social employee. There's a lot of great books. So part of what I often say when management doesn't get it yet is you got to change your informational diet. And that happens over time.
So Mitchell, what closing comments would you like to share out before we adjourn for the day?
Well, Mike, as a architect, webinar architect, thought leader, you guys, your team, you did great. I really I thought this was a top-notch job. I really liked what your team did to help create and put this message in the marketplace. For those that are listening, I am fairly WYSIWYG. I am what you see, what you hear. I'm excited to help. If you have ideas, thoughts, need help in a certain area, feel free to ping me. I'm happy to get back to you. I'll try my best to respond to those who are interested in arranging meetings. I'll try my best to get that quickly. But also I'd love to get to know you better and meet you online. And why don't we become future advocates and advocates of each other going forward. Anyone who wants to take this content and use it and extend it in the marketplace, please do, because I think social selling is the new norm. We need to make it happen, and thought leadership, being the first thought leader architect of the world, thought leadership is what's going to drive companies going forward. And the only reason I say this, Mike, I can honestly predict that in 10 years the word thought leader will go away. And the reason I say that is because it'll just be what everyone does, right? It's not something everyone will want to do. It'll just be what everyone does. And so between now and then, let's work together to make it happen.
Well, I think one of the things we're keen to do is get some feedback on doing another thought leadership webinar in this series on thought leadership. So we really want to thank everybody for joining us. I don't know when an hour, not even an hour, has gone by so quickly. And if you have some other topics you'd like to hear, let us know. And I really want to thank Terry Holland on our team for doing all this behind-the-scenes work, but especially to my special guest, Mitchell Levy, for making today possible and getting me to put advocate in my vocabulary. Folks, thank you again for your time. Have a wonderful rest of the week and a happy holiday season. And again, as your moderator, this is Mike Agron. Bye for now.